Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. Just to say that we're going to, we'll dedicate tonight's shir for a shlema for Elliot's father, Yehuda ben Mindel, thinking of all the family this evening, and obviously also as a zeicher le'ilui nishmas, his mother, Yehuda's bas Moshe, and the family should have a nechama. We are looking at Parshas Vaeira. Parshas Vaeira is one of those parshas where I think in order to gain really new understandings, we have to really delve quite deeply into the parsha. And that's because we are so familiar. We are so familiar with the Makkas. We're so familiar with the trajectory of Yetzias Mitzrayim that we always run the risk with a parsha like this of just effectively going through the motions every year. You know, we go through the motions, we get to Shmos for Vaeira, it's just as it is every year. And the question is, how do you find something that is different, that is deeper, and that we can actually gain from? And I think that's really where the opportunity of a shir like this can hopefully create something special, in the sense that it can give us a very different perspective and something that is hopefully quite deep. So I'm going to take on a little bit of a journey this evening, and what I hope, where I'm hoping that we will end up, is with a profoundly different understanding of a part of davening, specifically to do with the Birchos HaShachar, that we say every single day. But I think certainly before I was sort of went into this, I certainly did not appreciate it at all as I think it is supposed to be. So let's begin. The beginning of the parsha makes clear that the essential question is the distinction between the question between the names of Hashem. So you have the name of Kel Shakai. So Hashem spoke to him, Hashem, I am Hashem. I appeared to the name. I appeared to the Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov with the name Kel Shakai. I never used that name, my name Hashem. In other words, I was never apparent to them with that name Hashem. And of course, there are different explanations of what this means. What was Hashem's message to Moshe Rabbeinu? And the main thrust of the Mefarshim seems to be that there is something extra, there is something deeper represented by the name Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, which cannot be expressed and is not expressed in a name of the name Kel Shakai. The depth of understanding of the ways of Hashem that is transmitted through the name Yud Kei Vav Kei is something which the Avos were not able, they weren't granted the zuchus to see. So, for example, one explanation brought in Rashi is the sense that they saw the promise, but not the fulfillment of the promise. They knew there was a promise that there would be a geula, there would be a redemption, but they never saw it, and yet they trusted, and yet they trusted me, Hashem says. There's a Sforno here, which the Sforno basically takes us, explains the difference between the two names as follows. He says like this. He says the name Ani Hashem, the very first Sforno in the parsha. He says Mekayim Hamatzias. What does Hashem mean? It means to effectively constantly establish the nature of the existence of the world. Come back to that's for in a second. If you jump to the next one, where he explains what Kel Shakai is. Kel Shakai, which of course the word Shin and then Dalad Yud means enough, sufficient. He says Hamoreshem Tseisi Es Hamatzios Kuloi. He says that the name means the bringing into existence of the whole of creation, the whole of existence, if you like. The Sforno Bereshis in Parshas Lech Lecha goes into this in more detail, and he says that everything in the world is defined by its relationship with something else. So everything is created by something, and it's defined. It's either the one that brings it into being, or it is the thing that is brought into being. It's defined by its relationship with something else. When we call Hashem with that name, Kel Shakai, the meaning is that he is so to speak, sufficient b'fnei atzmo, by himself. There is no need to define anything Hashem does with any interaction with anything else. It is entirely himself and himself alone. In the context of the promise and the nature of the relationship with the Avos, what we mean is that Hashem brought everything into existence. The essence of the name Hashem, or Shmi Hashem lo nodati lahem, that I wasn't known to them by that name Hashem, means, to go back to that first Sephono, Mekayim HaMetzias. The nature of Hashem's existence as someone, as the entity, as the sustainer of existence, the one who ensures that existence continuously exists, not just, as the Sephono says, Lo mamtzio bilvad, not just the one who brings it into existence, the one who establishes it and makes sure that it remains the whole time, feeds life into the world all the time. Sephono carries on and says, there is, to the existence, the name Hashem symbolizes that there is no way that existence itself gives up hope in any way, shape, or form. In other words, it's entirely tied to Hashem sustaining it all the time, as the Pasuk says in Nehemiah, you give life all the time to the world. So what we see from this Sephono is that the distinction between the name Kel Shakai and the name Hashem is the name Kel Shakai means the one who brings the world into existence in the first place. And the name Hashem is the one who sustains the world all the time, constantly, the idea of constantly being there for the world. Now, there's another Sephono in Perek Zayin Posuk Tes. Perek Zayin Posuk Tes, the Sephono picks up on the distinction between an os and a mofes. We find that both phrases are used in the Parsha, and last week's Parsha as well. And Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, when Paro says to you, Tnu lochem mofes, give me a wonder, literally, something wondrous, and that is when he's supposed to cast his staff down and it turns into a snake. What is the difference between an os, a sign, and a mofes? He says, ha-mofes hu, lohoros al godal ha-mashaleach. What the mofes does is it demonstrates the greatness of the sender, the one who is the mashalech, the one who sends, who directs the activity. V'sharoi lishmoa b'koloi, and that one needs to listen to his voice. Omnam, he says, ha'os hu edus lashliach. The os, the sign, that's testimony for the agent himself, to prove that he is actually the right agent, that he is what he says he is. And that is why, in last week's Parsha it says, he made the sign, he made the signs, he produced the signs in front of the Bnei Yisrael. The Bnei Yisrael didn't have a question about the greatness of Hashem himself, but it had to be proven to them that he was Hashem's shliach. And that's why when it comes to Bnei Yisrael, it's osos, it's signs that he's the shliach. Whereas when it comes to Paro, Shoim Masupik says, he wasn't sure about the existence of the Mashalech or even denied it. As it says, Lo yodati es Hashem. For that, he needs a mofes, a wonder that proves the greatness and the kol yocholto, the all-encompassing strength and power of Hashem himself. So once again, to tie together this observation of the Sephono with the previous one, we see the same theme, that the entire thrust of the Parsha, as it representing through the Makkos the whole way through, beginning with that idea of the name Shem Hashem Yud-Kei Vav-Kei and what it represents, is the greatness of Hashem, specifically in bringing an understanding to the world of the fact that Hashem constantly enables the creation to exist, to survive. And if so, that is also clearly the essence of the Makkos themselves. They demonstrate the fact that Hashem constantly guides every detail of creation. There is an observation of Reb Nosson Tzvi Finkel of Slobodka. He has a sefer called Ar HaTzofon, and he says that he says, we know that the beginning of the Aseres HaDibros says, Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher tzeisecha me'eretz Mitzrayim. I am Hashem Elokecha who brought you out from the land of Egypt. So you see, it must be that there is something new with Yetzias Mitzrayim over and above Ma'aser Bereshis. Hashem creates this. We acknowledge Hashem both as the one who creates the world and also the one who brought us out from Egypt. What is the distinction? He says the distinction is this very point. This very idea, he says, that Mitzias Mitzrayim lemedim onu yesod chodosh. We learn something entirely new. Not just that the Bria, etc., works itself in the sense that Hashem creates every aspect of the world and has that constant observation over it, the hashgacha tmidis, but the fact that it is mischadeshes for us, b'chol rega v'rega, that the world renews itself, that Hashem puts a life force into the world every moment and every second. Now, with this, he says, we can understand several aspects and the detail that the Midrashim go into in describing the Makkos themselves. We're familiar with these because we learn them from the earliest, from our earliest years as children. But in this context, in the context of understanding that the message of the Makkos is that Hashem is constantly engaged and involved in recreating every moment the world and giving existence to the world, the Mechaya es Kulam, we understand what these Midrashim mean. Says the author of Slobodka like this. He says, Makas dam, afilu ma'asho'eh b'kitzur na'aseh dam. He says, we know what happened with Makas dam, that you can have a jug and the Mitzri is drinking from one side and the Yisrael is drinking from the other side. Reb Levi says that's how they became wealthy. Why? Because they were able to sell the water that they had to the Mitzrayim, to the Egyptians. And you have this phenomena where the Mitzri is drinking on one side and its blood, and the Yisrael is drinking on the other side and its water. What is the idea here? The idea is that this could only take place, this could only transpire if the world itself was renewed every moment, in the sense that every moment, every drop is created at that second, and the decision, so to speak, the split-second decision is made. Is this going to the Mitzri? Is this going to the Egyptian? Or is this going to the Jew? Every split second, a decision is made to create that drop of water and what direction it goes in. You find the same thing, he says, with Makas Choshech in next week's Parsha, in darkness. How can it be? There is light in their dwellings. How can there be Choshech in one place and light in another? For the Jew to be able to move into the Mitzri's house and to see what they have there, as we know, so they know what to take as their schar, as their payment. All of this is the same idea. Every moment Hashem decides, should there be light in this place? Should there be darkness? It's not something which is simply set in motion to run of its own accord. Makas Bara, the same thing. You have the same idea. It's complete. The weather conditions over Goshen are perfectly fine, beautiful. The sun is shining. And over Mitzrayim, the weather is terrible. It is the Makas Bara, the same thing. Weather itself, it's Hashem defining every moment, how things should be, guiding every detail of creation. So he goes further and he says, with that, we understand what we say in Birkas HaShachar. When we say, Roika ha'aretz al hamoyim, that Hashem spreads out the land over the water, what do we mean? We mean that every moment Hashem spreads out the land over the water. Hashem ensures that the land is the land and the water is the water. The fact that we are able to walk on dry land, on that solid land. The idea, as we know that it says in Bereshis, the idea that how the Shemayim are formed, Shemayim, fire and water, they come together. The idea being creating Shemayim itself. How can it be? How could it be that they effectively exist? How could the Eish Umayim make peace between them for Makas Bara? Because Hashem decreed that it should be so. So every moment we say those brachas in the morning, that we recognize Hashem's control, what we mean to say is this is a constant motion, constant demonstration of the fact that we can live by his word. When we say, for example, Shakol ni'eh b'dvoro, on every drop of water, we mean Shakol ni'eh b'dvoro, that everything in the world comes into existence through his word, that this particular drop, just as in Mitzrayim, he decided whether it should be blood or water, depending on who was drinking from it, so too when we drink that drop of water, we're acknowledging Shakol ni'eh b'dvoro, that Hashem decreed that this moment, this drop should come into existence, that this water should exist from now. And that it is as much of a nace, of a miracle as such, as the Nisim in Mitzrayim. That's why Bali Kriya will notice something very striking in Parshas Vaeira, that when you get into the Makkas, the breakup of the Parsha is an unusual place, unusual places. Sometimes it's in the middle of Makkas, sometimes it's in seemingly strange places where the Baal Korah stops for each aliyah once you get into the Makkas. So you get to, and that's because this goes to the very heart of what this parsha is all about. So you go to the end of Revi, Vayomer Lamachar, in the middle of Makas Svardim. He says, when should I remove them? Vayomer Lamachar, tomorrow. Vayomer Kidvar will be as you say, Leman Teidakin Hashem Elokeinu, so that you know that there is none like Hashem, our God. You get to the same thing, end of Chamishi, and it is the Orov, and again in the middle, Leman Teida, so that you know, Ki Ani Hashem B'kerev Haaretz, that I am Hashem in the midst of the land. The same thing right in the middle. Why? Because this is the essence of what the Makkas are. And Shishi is the same thing. Shishi is the same thing. It is right in the middle. It is right in the middle of Dever. It says, I should show you my strength. And in order that you tell my name, you speak about my name in the entire land. So the way the Parsha is broken unusually is clear that this is the message of Parshas Vaeira. What does that have to do without daily tefillah beyond the brachos that I mentioned before? There's another and deeper message. I saw an incredible idea from Rav Shimon Schwab in his Pirush on Tefillah. If you have a siddur nearby, it's worth opening it, even though you're all familiar with this bracha. But it is worth just understanding, because when you see the questions that he asks, it hits you. It's so odd. Why didn't I think of this before? He focuses on the bracha of Hamaver Sheino Me'enai Snuma Me'afapoy, the final longer bracha that we say at the end of Berachos Hashachar, who removes sleep from my eyes and slumber from my eyelids. The questions here are obvious. Number one, this should be at the beginning of the list. We bring a long list, and each list, as we know, the Gemara Bracha says, and although nowadays we group them all together, there were historically times that they were done probably as at each stage of the process of waking up in the morning, of getting dressed, everything else, to be able to put on shoes, everything else. Or everything has a different occurrence. Alamoy, as you mentioned before, Malbish Harumim, everything has a different stage. It goes through the stages. It's an expression of gratitude for every single thing that we can do in the morning from the moment we wake up. And then we get to the end of the brachos and we say, Hamavish Sheino Me'enai, who has removed sleep from my eyes. That should be number one. That's the first question. Why is it not the first bracha? Number two, what is the connection between this bracha and the previous brachas that go immediately beforehand? You've got the brachas beforehand, Ota Yisrael B'Sifara, who crowns Yisrael with splendor, Oza Yisrael B'Gvura, who girds Yisrael with strength. These are brachas about the whole of the Jewish people. What does Hamav Sheino Me'enai have to do with it, right? And as part of that, he says, you have another problem. The end of the bracha seems nothing to do with the beginning. How do we finish off the bracha? Hagomel chasodim tovim am Yisrael, who bestows goodness, kindness on the Jewish people. Again, what's one got to do with the other? We give them Avishena, we have that Gomel chasodim tovim am Yisrael. It seems all over the place. We never do that with brachas. Always a simple klal with brachas. The beginning has to be the same as the end. It's one long bracha. Incredible questions, obvious, basic. Those are the best questions. And the third question he asks is that we start. The text itself begins with the individual, Hamav Sheino Me'enai, from my eyes, and then it continues in the plural. Shetargilenu, Yirot Lefanecha, Shetargilenu b'Serasecha. You should accommodate us. We should be familiar with your Torah in the plural. Shetargilenu b'Serasecha. So what is the shift from the personal to the plural? Says Rosh Shimon Schwab like this. He says that we find at the creation of Adam and Chava, we know that Adam is cast into a deep sleep. Vayapel Hashem Elokim tardemo al ha'adam, and he takes achas mitzalosov on his ribs. From the creation of Chava, and Adam says, "Zos hapam etzem me'atzom evosem ebasori lezosi korei yisha." For this she shall be called a woman. But the amazing thing is that it doesn't actually say. The Torah doesn't actually say that he ever awoke. It doesn't say that he ever woke up. says there was a deep sleep, put into a deep sleep, and he doesn't actually talk about his waking from that deep sleep. He exclaims, this is a bone from flesh from my flesh. He's very happy with the creation of Chava, but he doesn't wake up. The idea is, says Rav Schwab, is that before, as we know, Chazal say, there was this dual existence of Adam and Chava together as one entity. He perceived the Shekhinah at a level that we can't even begin to comprehend. He understood what it meant to say, that the world is filled with the glory of Hashem. He understood he had a direct connection. Once the deep sleep falls upon him, he never regains that deep awareness that he had before of Hashem's presence. And forevermore, humanity remains effectively in that state of slumber, that state of limited awareness. He never really wakes up. He never really gets back to that moment, that level of intense awareness of Hashem's presence. However, what does happen is that through history, Bnei Yisrael have been privileged to have a glimpse, a flash, a moment of a real visualization of what it must have been like for Adam and Chava before they were separated, before the creation of Chava as described. There are certain moments in our history when we've been able to say, Malchus Chor Ro'u Vanecho, is they saw, we describe it as that, they saw your kingship. One of those moments, perhaps the most important of those moments, is of course during Yetzias Mitzrayim. During Yetzias Mitzrayim, what happened was for a brief moment, there was an insight into the depth, the clarity of vision that was needed to understand our relationship with Hashem. That Shmi Hashem, that my name Hashem, they became aware of what the name Hashem was. He brings a moshel that Rabbi Yerucham Leibovitz used to say to illustrate this. He said there was once an institution for people who were blind from birth, and people who lived in that in the institute. They worked, they married, they lived long lives, everything was fine. And one day there was a professor who visited and asked for a volunteer for a new operation that he had developed. And he said, this operation is incredible. This will change your lives. This will give you vision, but it only lasts for 24 hours. And we all want a volunteer who are prepared to undergo this operation to have sight for 24 hours. And one person volunteers and he undergoes the operation. And the result is exactly as predicted. For the first time in his life, he sees the world. He sees faces, human beings. He sees his wife, his children. Everything is incredible. He sees colors, flowers, trees, houses. He sees the sun. He sees the moon, the stars. He goes to sleep. And the next morning he wakes up and he's blind as before. He doesn't see anything else. That's all he can see. But after that experience, everyone else in the institution for the Blind elects him their leader. Why? Because he knows what the world really looks like. And he can now act as an advisor. He can help inform them. He can inform them what it means, what the world out there really means. He says that, says Rabbi Yerucham, was the experience of Klal Yisrael in history. Mankind as a whole remains in that state of tardema, the slumber of Adam Harishon. But we have been privileged at certain moments, certain incredible moments in our history, to be able to have that clarity of vision. And Yetzias Mitzrayim was one of those great moments. The problem is, of course, is that the rest of the time, and afterwards, subsequently, we slip back into our moments of tardema, our slumber. But we can still say, we can still proclaim to the rest of the world what it was like during those 24 hours, what it was like during those brief moments of vision. So he says like this, he says, in its broader sense, thanks Hashem for having awakened us, even though it's for a short time, from that slumber of mankind, the slumber, sleep, for allowing us to clearly witness the presence of Hashem. We can only say it in the singular. Why? Because many of us are still in that state of our eyes being closed, as with the rest of the world. It can only be said in the singular because not everyone can do this. Not everyone can open their eyes. And the rest of the world can't necessarily have that opportunity in that way to see that clarity of vision. But as individuals, or Klal Yisrael representing individuals, they have those moments of vision where we can say, who removes sleep from my eyes. But then the rest of the bracha makes perfect sense. Why? Because the bracha then is a tefillah, shetagilenu b'serasecha. Grant us the opportunities to have that vision in life, to learn Torah, to not fall into temptation. Don't let us be distracted from our task in life. Let us focus on retaining that clarity of vision that we saw during Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's what we mean. That's what we mean with the rest of this bracha. We say, with Abkeinu b'yetzar tovim v'masim tovim, and we say, v'sigmalenu chasodim tovim, bestow upon us your kindness in that way. And then we finish off, Baruch atah Hashem, gomel chasodim tovim la'am Yisrael, who bestows kindness upon Klal Yisrael. And we asked, if you recall, that the problem is that this ending to the bracha seems totally detached from the first part of the bracha, but it isn't. It makes perfect sense. And it makes sense as to why it follows on from the global brachas of Ote Yisrael B'Sifaro, crowns Yisrael with splendor, with glory. Why? Because the bracha as a whole refers to the experience of the Jewish people of Klal Yisrael. When we have the Torah and the mitzvahs, when we're attached to them, Hashem has removed that slumber from our eyes, the sleep from our eyes. Now, as a member, as part of Klal Yisrael, we can see the world clearly, like the individual who's given those momentary moments of sight when he's able to see just for a short time. So we conclude, Hagomel Chasodim Tovim L'Am Yisrael, who gives kindness to the Jewish people. The greatest kindness that Hashem has given us in our history has been those moments when we were awake from our slumber, when we were able to see clearly our relationship to Him, and the idea that not only is Hashem the one who brings the world into existence, the idea of Kel Shakai, the idea of the Hashem bringing something yesh me'ayin from nothing into complete existence, but also Ani Hashem, that I'm constantly Mekayim the Metzias, the one who we say Atom Mechaya es Kulam, you give life to everything. When we say this bracha in the morning, what we really mean to do is we mean to bring alive, we ask Hashem to make the experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim something which accompanies us in life forever. It is effectively the lesson of the first of the Aseret HaDibros, the message, Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher hotzeisecha me'eretz Mitzrayim. I took you out of Mitzrayim, and that gives you a level of understanding of what it means, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. I am Hashem, your God. And when we daven in this way, when we understand a bracha, as I said, this is extraordinary just because it gives us a completely new understanding in what this bracha is doing, what the whole function of the bracha is. And it allows us to look not just at our tefillas as a whole in a different way, but also our relationship with how we view the world. We have a choice in life. We can either go through life, again, using that marshal of those people those who never had the gift of sight and those who did, those who briefly had the gift of sight for a short period of time. We can either go through life constantly in the state of our eyes being closed, the idea of being sheina, sleep on our eyes all the time. We can go through life in that way if we choose to. Or we can go through life with that tefillah of the rest of the bracha every day. Give us the vision. Give us the vision, even for a short time, to connect to that experience in Yetzias Mitzrayim, when we could see the greatness of Hashem, when we could see the fact that every single drop that Hashem gives is directed directly from Him to us. So that when we say Shakol Niyeh B'Dvaro, that everything comes into existence through His word, we mean this very drop He brought into existence. And when we say that, we can really deeply understand what it means to say Hagomel Chasodim Tovim L'Am Yisrael, who does kindness to the Jewish people, kindness to enable us to have that momentary vision historically, and kindness to enable us to hopefully transmit that vision as ambassadors to the rest of mankind. And that, I think, is a new perspective on the Makkos. It's a different perspective. It's hopefully a deeper perspective on understanding this parsha. And I thank you all very much for joining me to hear it this evening. Have a very, very good Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Have a good Shabbos.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good Shabbos, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. Shabbos.